Imagine, if you will, a scene so grotesque, so utterly beyond the pale, that it seems ripped directly from the darkest, most unsettling corners of a Gothic novel. A spectacle of horror and political vengeance that would forever stain the annals of one of the world's oldest and most revered institutions. The year is 897 Anno Domini. The city is Rome, the eternal city, the spiritual heart of Western Christendom. But on this fateful day, Rome is far from a sanctuary of peace or piety. Instead, it is a metropolis consumed by ruthless political machinations, unbridled ambition, and a papacy that has, for far too long, descended into an abyss of scandal, intrigue, and bloodshed. In the hallowed, echo-filled halls of the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the very cathedral that serves as the official seat of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, a trial is underway. But this is no ordinary trial, no solemn judicial proceeding against a living transgressor. No, the accused in this court of twisted justice is not a man of flesh and blood, capable of defending himself or pleading his case. The accused is a corpse, a decaying 9-month-old cadaver, its once venerated form now a ghastly relic, dressed in the sacred papal vestments, propped up on a throne as if still alive, its vacant, sightless eyes staring into the torchlit gloom of the synod hall. Before it stands a living pope, Stephen VI, his face contorted with a chilling blend of righteous fury and barely contained madness, his voice thundering accusations that reverberate through the ancient stones, directed at the silent, decaying figure before him. This is the infamous Cadaver Synod, or, as it was chillingly known in its time, the Synodus Horrenda, the horrifying synod. A moment in history so bizarre, so utterly shocking in its audacity and depravity, that it defies rational belief. It sounds like a macabre fiction, a dark fable whispered in the shadows. But it happened. Every grotesque detail, every chilling accusation, every act of desecration, it all transpired in the very heart of the Christian world, and at its heart lies a tale of power, betrayal, desperate struggles for control of the holiest office on earth, and a vengeance that transcended the grave. This is the story of Pope Formosus, a man of God caught in a web of mortal ambition, and how he was excommunicated, humiliated, and ultimately desecrated, not by a rival claimant but by a legitimate successor, a fellow pope. To truly grasp the depths of this madness, to comprehend how such an unthinkable event could ever occur, we must first journey back in time. We must delve into a period when the spiritual authority of the papacy was inextricably intertwined with the brutal, often bloody realities of temporal power. A time when popes were not merely spiritual leaders, but also powerful political figures, their elections and their very lives dictated by the whims of powerful Roman aristocratic families. It was a time when the very soul of the Church hung precariously in the balance, constantly threatened by the ambitions of men who saw the papal throne as little more than a stepping stone to earthly dominion. Our story begins not with a rotting corpse, but with a living, breathing man of considerable intellect, profound piety, and remarkable diplomatic skill, Formosus. Born in Rome, likely around the year 816 AD, he was destined for a life within the Church. He rose steadily through the ecclesiastical ranks, not through noble birth or political manoeuvring, but through sheer merit and dedication. He was known for his sharp mind, his eloquent speech, and perhaps most importantly, his fervent commitment to missionary work. Formosus first gained widespread recognition as Bishop of Porto, a significant diocese near Rome. It was from this position that he embarked on a mission that would define his early career and earn him immense respect across the European continent. He served as a papal legate to Bulgaria, a newly Christianized kingdom on the fringes of the Byzantine Empire. His efforts there were instrumental in consolidating the Bulgarians' conversion to Christianity, and he earned a reputation as a shrewd negotiator and a dedicated evangelist. His success in Bulgaria brought him into contact with powerful figures across the Carolingian Empire and beyond, forging connections that would prove both beneficial and ultimately perilous. But Rome in the 9th century was no quiet centre of spiritual contemplation. It was a viper's nest of political factions, a city perpetually on the brink of civil strife. The ancient Roman aristocracy, far from fading into history, had merely transformed, forming powerful families, the Spoletos, the Tusculani, the Crescenti, among others, each vying ruthlessly for influence over the papacy. The papal office, controlling vast lands, immense wealth, and unparalleled spiritual authority, was the ultimate prize. Popes were often little more than pawns in their deadly, often fratricidal games. Formosus, despite his spiritual inclinations, found himself inextricably caught in this intricate and dangerous web. He was, by all accounts, a man of principle, committed to the Church's mission. Yet even he had to navigate the treacherous currents of Roman politics, making alliances and sometimes compromises that would later come back to haunt him. His first major brush with profound controversy came during the pontificate of Pope John III. John, a strong-willed and assertive pope, was deeply suspicious of Formosus. He believed Formosus was conspiring against him, particularly regarding the delicate issue of the imperial crown, a prize that both the Pope and various European monarchs desperately sought to control. In 876, John V took drastic action. He excommunicated Formosus. The accusations were severe. Formosus had abandoned his see, his diocese of Porto. He had conspired against the emperor, and most damningly, he was accused of planning to seize the papacy for himself. Stripped of his office, forbidden from celebrating Mass, and explicitly prohibited from ever returning to Rome, Formosus was forced into a humiliating exile. He was made to swear a solemn oath, never to re-enter the city nor to resume his episcopal duties. It was a crushing blow to a man who had dedicated his life to the Church, but the political landscape of 9th century Rome was as volatile as it was brutal. John VIII himself, a powerful but embattled figure, was assassinated in 1882, a stark testament to the ruthless nature of Roman politics and the precariousness of even the highest office. With John VIII gone, the fortunes of Formosus began to turn. Successive popes, Marinus III and Stephen V, recognised Formosus's undeniable talents, his diplomatic acumen, and his underlying integrity. His excommunication was formally lifted, and he was reinstated as Bishop of Porto. His reputation for wisdom, experience, and resilience grew, making him an increasingly prominent and respected figure within the Church hierarchy. He had survived exile and disgrace, emerging with his standing largely intact. By 891, the papal throne was once again vacant. Despite the lingering shadows of his past excommunication and the oath he had sworn, which some still considered binding, Formosus was widely seen as the most capable and experienced candidate to lead the Church through its turbulent times. He was elected Pope, taking the name Formosus. His pontificate began with a clear and ambitious vision, to restore order and moral authority to the Church, and crucially, to assert papal independence, particularly against the overbearing influence of the powerful Spoleto faction. The House of Spoleto, led by the formidable Guy III and later his equally ambitious son Lambert, had become a dominant force in Italy. They had been crowned Holy Roman Emperors by previous popes, but their hunger for power knew no bounds. They sought to control not just vast swathes of Italy, but Rome itself, and by extension, the papacy. Formosus, however, was a pope of strong will and clear purpose. He was determined to resist their encroachments and re-establish the papacy's autonomy. To achieve this, he looked north, to the rising power of the East Frankish king Arnulf of Carinthia as a potential counterweight, a powerful ally who could liberate Rome from Spoleto's suffocating grip. In 894, Formosus formally invited Arnulf to intervene in Italy and rescue Rome from the oppressive control of the Spoleto family. Arnulf, a formidable warrior and a descendant of Charlemagne, responded. His campaign was swift and largely successful, culminating in February 896, when Arnulf entered Rome. Formosus, seizing this crucial opportunity, performed one of the most significant acts of his pontificate. He crowned Arnulf Holy Roman Emperor in the venerable St. Peter's Basilica. This act, however, was a direct and undeniable challenge to the Spoleto family, particularly to Lambert of Spoleto, who still considered himself the legitimate emperor. It was a bold declaration of independence, but it also set the stage for a bitter and dangerous conflict that would soon consume Rome. Tragically for Formosus, Arnulf soon fell gravely ill and was forced to retreat back to his kingdom, leaving Formosus vulnerable and exposed to the wrath of the vengeful Spoletos. Formosus died shortly after Arnulf's departure in April 896. His pontificate, though marked by significant diplomatic achievements and a courageous stand against temporal interference, ended with Rome once again plunged into political chaos and uncertainty. He had tried, with all his might, to steer the Church through treacherous waters, to restore its dignity and independence, but his actions, particularly his audacious alliance with Arnulf and the subsequent imperial coronation, had created powerful, unforgiving enemies, enemies who would not forget, even in death. The death of Formosus, far from bringing peace, plunged Rome into even deeper instability. The papal throne became a revolving door, a prize to be seized by whichever faction held temporary sway. His immediate successor, Boniface VI, reigned for a mere 15 days before dying, under suspicious circumstances, possibly poisoned. The air in Rome was thick with paranoia and ambition, and then came Stephen VI. Stephen VI was a cardinal priest of San Marcello, but more importantly he was a staunch and unwavering member of the Spoleto faction. He was a loyal ally of Lambert of Spoleto, and crucially of Lambert's formidable and vengeful mother Agiltrude. For them, Formosus was not merely a deceased pope, he was a traitor, a usurper who had dared to betray their family by crowning their rival, Arnulf. Stephen VI, fueled by their insatiable desire for vengeance, and perhaps his own deep-seated personal animosity towards Formosus, was utterly determined to undo everything Formosus had accomplished, to erase his very memory from the historical record. But how does one undo the acts of a dead pope? How does one invalidate a coronation performed by a deceased pontiff, annul the ordinations he had conferred, and effectively erase an entire pontificate from the annals of the Church? In a city where ancient superstitions mingled dangerously with ruthless political expediency, a monstrous, unprecedented idea began to take root. The solution, in their twisted logic, was shockingly simple: put the dead pope on trial. 9 months after his death, in January of 897, the body of Formosus was brutally exhumed from its tomb in St. Peter's Basilica. Imagine the scene, the sheer horror of it, the putrid stench of decay, the disturbing sight of skeletal remains, the sacrilege of disturbing the consecrated dead. His corpse, now a skeletal decaying figure, its flesh long gone, was dragged through the narrow winding streets of Rome. It was a macabre procession, a grotesque parade of vengeance, leading to the very heart of the Church's judicial power, the Basilica of St. John Lateran. There, in the very synod hall where Formosus himself had once presided with dignity and authority, the Cadaver Synod began. Pope Stephen VI, dressed in full pontifical robes, his face grim and resolute, presided over the proceedings. The hall was packed with bishops, cardinals, and Roman nobility, many of whom had served under Formosus, some even having been ordained by him. Some were undoubtedly horrified by the spectacle, their faces pale with shock. Others were complicit, their expressions grim and unreadable. All, however, were surely gripped by a potent mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and a chilling awareness of the raw power being wielded before them. The rotting corpse of Formosus was propped up on a throne, dressed in papal vestments, a grotesque parody of a living pontiff. A deacon, undoubtedly chosen under duress, was appointed to stand beside the cadaver, serving as its defence counsel. But this was no genuine defence. It was a grotesque farce, a cruel mockery of justice. The accusations were read out loud and clear for all to hear. Formosus had violated canon law by transferring from the See of Porto to Rome, a charge directly related to the oath he had sworn to John Luff years earlier, and he had most heinously usurped the papacy. Stephen VI, his voice booming through the echoing hall, interrogated the silent corpse. "When you were Bishop of Porto," he reportedly demanded, his voice laced with venom, "why did you usurp the universal Roman see in such a spirit of ambition?" The deacon, of course, could offer no defence. The accused was dead, and the trial was nothing more than a predetermined act of political vengeance, a theatrical display designed to justify a foregone conclusion. The verdict was swift and predictably brutal. Formosus was found guilty on all counts. His pontificate was declared null and void, as if it had never happened. All his acts, including the ordinations he had performed during his papacy, and, crucially, the imperial coronation of Arnulf, were retroactively invalidated. Chaos would surely follow, as countless clergy and imperial decrees were suddenly rendered illegitimate. But the humiliation, the vengeance, did not end there. The sentence decreed a horrifying, almost unthinkable desecration. The 3 fingers of Formosus's right hand, the very fingers he had used to bless the faithful, to consecrate the Eucharist, and to perform the most sacred rites of the Church, were brutally cut off. His sacred papal vestments were then stripped from his decaying form, leaving him exposed. The body was then dragged through the streets of Rome once more, A final public humiliation before being ignominiously thrown into the Tiber River, as if he were nothing more than a common criminal, his remains left to rot in the murky waters. The Cadaver Synod was more than just a trial. It was a shocking display of political vengeance, a desperate and depraved attempt by the Spoleto faction to utterly erase the legacy of a pope who had dared to defy them. It was a moment of profound moral degradation for the papacy, a stain on its history so dark and indelible that it would be remembered with horror for centuries to come. It was a testament to how far political ambition could drag even the holiest of offices into the mire of human depravity. The immediate aftermath of the Cadaver Synod was a volatile mixture of widespread horror and simmering outrage. Even in a time accustomed to brutal politics and sudden shifts in power, the desecration of a dead pope, the vicar of Christ, was a step too far for many Romans. The public, witnessing such an unholy spectacle, was appalled. The very ground on which Pope Stephen VI stood, believing he had cemented his power, began to crumble beneath his feet. Miraculously, or perhaps providentially, the body of Formosus was recovered from the murky waters of the Tiber River by a devout monk, who, risking his own life, secretly buried it. The act of desecration, far from cementing Stephen VI's power and erasing Formosus's memory, had backfired spectacularly. The people of Rome, disgusted by his actions and the sheer barbarity of the synod, turned decisively against him. They saw not a righteous judge, but a vengeful tyrant. Stephen VI's reign, built on such a foundation of sacrilege and cruelty, was short-lived. The widespread outrage over the Cadaver Synod, combined with his increasingly tyrannical behaviour and the general instability he had unleashed, led swiftly to his downfall. He was imprisoned by his own disgruntled supporters, and shortly thereafter, in July or August of 897, barely 6 months after the Cadaver Synod, he was strangled to death in his cell. The wheel of fortune had turned with brutal speed, delivering a grim justice to the architect of the horrifying synod. The papacy, however, continued its tumultuous journey through this dark period. Several popes succeeded Stephen VI in quick succession, each attempting in their own way to grapple with the horrifying legacy of the Cadaver Synod and restore some semblance of order and legitimacy to the Holy See. Pope Theodore II, who reigned for a mere 20 days in 897, was the first to take decisive action. Despite his incredibly brief pontificate, he managed to have Formosus's body formally reinterred with full papal honours in St. Peter's Basilica, a symbolic act of restoration. He also convened a synod that formally annulled the Cadaver Synod, declaring its proceedings invalid and its judgments null. His successor, Pope John IX, 898-900, further solidified Formosus's rehabilitation and worked tirelessly to undo the damage wrought by Stephen VI. He held 2 more crucial synods, one in Rome and another in Ravenna, which unequivocally condemned the Cadaver Synod. These synods reaffirmed the validity of Formosus's ordinations, a crucial step to prevent chaos among the clergy who'd been ordained by him. Furthermore, John IX issued a decree explicitly forbidding any future trials of the dead, recognising the profound sacrilege and political manipulation inherent in such an act. He even went so far as to excommunicate those who had actively participated in the Cadaver Synod, seeking to purge the Church of its most egregious offenders. It seemed for a brief moment that justice, however belated and hard-won, had finally been served. The dark chapter of the Cadaver Synod was closed, and Formosus's memory, along with the integrity of the papacy, appeared to be restored, or so it seemed. The political factions in Rome were relentless, their ambitions unyielding. The Spoleto family, though temporarily subdued and seemingly defeated, still harboured their deep-seated grievances and thirst for power. And lurking in the shadows, biding his time, was a man named Sergius. Sergius had been a key, active figure in the Cadaver Synod, a staunch supporter and accomplice of Stephen VI. He had been excommunicated by John IX for his role in the grotesque affair, and he had spent years in exile nursing his grudges, plotting his return, and waiting for the opportune moment to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. In 904, after a period of intense political manoeuvring, brutal infighting and widespread violence that once again plunged Rome into chaos, Sergius finally seized the papal throne. He became Pope Sergius III, and with his ascension, the tormented ghost of Formosus was once again dragged back into the light, his memory destined for another round of desecration. Sergius III was a man of ruthless ambition, unyielding will, and deep-seated personal vendettas. He had served as a deacon during the Cadaver Synod and was a fervent, unrepentant supporter of Stephen VI's actions. His return to power meant a complete and utter reversal of the rehabilitation of Formosus. He effectively held a second Cadaver Synod, though thankfully not with a literal corpse on trial this time. The symbolic desecration, however, was just as profound. Sergius III not only reaffirmed the condemnation of Formosus, declaring his pontificate invalid once more, but he also took the horrifying step of ordering Formosus's body to be exhumed again. This time, the remains, already 9 years interred, were reportedly decapitated. The head, along with the 3 remaining fingers, which had perhaps been recovered by the monk and reinterred, or were symbolic of the original desecration, was thrown into the Tiber River once more. The ordinations performed by Formosus were again declared invalid, plunging the clergy into immense confusion, distress, and spiritual uncertainty. Countless priests and bishops suddenly found their holy orders questioned, their sacraments potentially nullified. This was the ultimate act of excommunication by another pope. Sergius III, driven by a potent cocktail of personal vendetta, political alignment with the Spolitos, and a desire to erase any challenge to his own legitimacy, not only condemned Formosus's pontificate, but also repeated the gruesome sacrilegious desecration of his remains. It was a final, desperate, and horrifying attempt to erase Formosus from papal history and solidify the Spolito faction's absolute dominance over Rome and the Church. Sergius III's pontificate, marked by such extreme acts of vengeance and political violence, ushered in a new, even darker period for the papacy. This era, lasting for several decades, would become infamously known as the Saeculum Obscurum, or the Dark Age of the papacy. It was a time characterized by rampant corruption, profound moral decay, and the almost absolute dominance of powerful Roman aristocratic families who treated the papal throne as a personal possession, installing and deposing popes at will. The Cadaver Synod was a chilling precursor to this era of unprecedented papal degradation. The Cadaver Synod, and its grim, almost unbelievable repetition by Pope Sergius III, stands as one of the most bizarre, shocking, and deeply disturbing episodes in the entire history of the papacy. It was a period when the sacred spiritual office of the Vicar of Christ was reduced to a mere pawn in brutal, often bloody political power struggles. The sanctity of death, the authority of the Church, and the very concept of justice were all twisted and perverted for the sake of earthly ambition. What, then, can we truly learn from this macabre and unsettling tale? It serves as a stark and powerful reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the destructive and corrosive nature of vengeance, and how political ambition can corrupt even the holiest and most revered of institutions. The trial of a dead man, the horrifying desecration of his remains, and the subsequent bewildering reversals and re-reversals of papal decrees highlight a period of profound instability, moral bankruptcy, and spiritual crisis within the very heart of the Church. While the events of the Cadaver Synod are undoubtedly a dark and indelible stain on the history of the Catholic Church, they also paradoxically underscore the remarkable resilience of the papacy as an institution. Despite such extreme lows, despite being dragged through the mud of political intrigue and moral degradation, the institution endured. It survived this dark age, eventually undergoing periods of significant reform, reasserting its spiritual authority and ultimately continuing its mission. The memory of Formosus was eventually and definitively fully vindicated by later popes and historians who recognized the Cadaver Synod for the travesty it was. The story of the pope who got excommunicated by another pope is not merely a tale of historical oddity or a gruesome curiosity. It is a chilling and compelling window into the raw, often brutal realities of medieval power, where the sacred and the profane collided with devastating consequences. It is a stark and unforgettable reminder that even the highest offices, even those claiming divine authority, can fall prey to the darkest impulses of human ambition and vengeance. It's a story that continues to fascinate, horrify, and provoke thought, centuries after the silent, decaying corpse of Formosus was dragged into that torchlit synod hall, forever etching its macabre image into the annals of history.